Welcome to the Private Practice Startup, where we inspire you from startup to mastery. We chat with entrepreneurs, experts in the mental health and business arenas, and successful private practitioners to give you the tools needed to make your dream practice a reality. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, and so much more. Here are your hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Katie Lemieux, and I want to say I'm here with my sidekick, but really virtually here.
You're virtually here. Yes, I'm looking across at you, so nice to see you. And welcome back everybody for another episode. It's Dr. Kate Campbell, by the way.
Just in case. So we wanted to say welcome if you are brand new to Startup Nation. We are rolling out the red carpet for you and welcoming you to our family. And we also have a special gift for you. Head over to privatepracticestartup.com, go over to the resources tab, and download your A to Z cheat sheet essentials for building and growing your dream practice. And of course, if you're a loyal listener and family and friend already, we want to say welcome back. So we're really excited about today's episode. We have two awesome and amazing people here. And actually, we got to meet one of them live and in person, spend time with her. I actually was her roommate in Orlando, the awesome and amazing Allison per year. Hey, Allison.
Hey, welcome.
And on the other side of the four square or whatever game we're playing here on Zoom, I feel like, tic-tac-toe, I'm not really sure, is John Clark.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Welcome back to Mexico.
Thank you.
These are two amazing therapists and practice building folks in our industry. And if you don't know them yet, why not? And if you do know them, of course, you know that they're amazing. So Allison is the owner of Abundance Practice Building, where she helps therapists see that private practice is totally possible. And John is a therapist and business coach who helps therapists fill the empty slots in their calendars. And just a little shout out to John and his team at Unconditional Media. I've actually utilized you guys for SEO and had an amazing experience. You guys crafted SEO in a way that most people haven't, so I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars paying those monthly fees, and it actually created great results. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I love hearing that.
How's that spontaneous testimonial? Awesome.
Yeah, right.
I love it. Priceless.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I love giving prop shout outs to those who deserve it and help people. So appreciate you guys. So this podcast comes today from a request from one of our Startup Nation superheroes. And the request was, how do you move a private practice? And you guys have actually both done that. And the cool thing is Allison interviewed John on her podcast on how to do that. So we're going to also add that to the show notes page. So the link will be there so you can listen to that podcast as well. But before we get started, Kate will share a message from our sponsor.
Yes, today's podcast episode is sponsored by the Private Practice Startup Podcast, attorney-approved private practice paperwork. It's a tongue twister. And if you're a clinician in private practice, you know that having legal and ethical paperwork is super important because you don't want to be at risk with any legal issues. You want to protect yourself so you can continue doing what you love. And it's super time-consuming to create that from scratch, and let alone very expensive to have it reviewed by an attorney. So we took care of that for you. We have both a la carte and packages available. So head over to privatepracticestartup.com and look for the shop tab. You'll see all of our paperwork options there. We also have business paperwork and supervision paperwork. And if you want to experience the paperwork and the quality, you can head over to the resources tab on our website, and you can download a free copy of the HIPAA form and get your release of information for just $5. So make sure to check that out.
Awesome. And if you want, I know I mentioned John and Unconditional Media regarding SEO. We also did a podcast with Perry Rosenblum last time, SEO, Get Google to Love You. So there's so much information to know about SEO. I don't think you can probably invest enough time learning about that. And especially since Google kind of rules the world, they change a lot of things. So it's important to stay up to date, but hire the experts. That's my advice. So let's jump into our topic today, which is how to successfully move a private practice. And I think maybe where we should start is just kind of, where have you guys had private practices, and then where did you move to?
Yeah. Well, it looks like Allison's on the move right now. So I'm just gonna jump in and looks like she's making lunch.
I think Allison said, oh crap, there's noise in the background or something. I got to run and move.
Can I tell you something totally unrelated real quick? Is that our next door neighbor is a famous YouTuber for like motor things. So he just went by on a legit skateboard that was motorized. He just like
that sounds so made up.
Yeah, I totally made that up.
So he's totally on the move. Allison is on the move, and we'll talk about moving private practices.
Yeah.
This is something that I have zero experience with. My private practice is in Fort Lauderdale, and it's staying in Fort Lauderdale forever. I'm not going anywhere. So
I made the joke already that my first piece of advice is just don't do it. Don't move unless you have to, or unless it's for the betterment of your partner's career, your partner's life, your life. I don't know. But I built my first practice in San Francisco, which was a good place to learn a lot of hard lessons and to learn, especially when it comes to using the internet to promote a practice. And in my case, almost exclusively using the internet to promote a practice. So, at the time I didn't realize how, all the important lessons I was learning. And there was times where I resented being in such a saturated area, in such a tech savvy area. But then I realized once I left, I was like, it's probably never going to be quite as hard as it was there. And that was definitely the truth when I came to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am now, and started my practice here. So yeah, that's kind of where I learned things the hard way.
Jumped into the deep end and learned how to swim.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Allison, you've had 3 places?
Yeah. So I started out in Athens, Georgia, which is like a small college town, and then moved to Seattle. And I was just part-time in Athens. For some reason, I felt the need to hold on to a full-time job and a part-time practice for 5 years, which I would not recommend. So then when I went to Seattle, I was so burned out with working for people who didn't know how to manage people, that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this full time. This is a great idea in a city where I know 0 people. And so, but it went really well and I really enjoyed it. And, aside from all the crying and worry, and then, moved back to the Southeast, and I'm in Asheville, just 2 hours away from John. So I'm in Asheville, North Carolina now, and started there as well. And it's great that I'm glad both John and I are here because we have very different experiences in growing practices. When I interviewed him for my podcast, I was like, this is like the flip side of the coin in building successful practice. It's awesome.
This is why if we ever in some bizarre universe started a group practice together, we would do great.
Yeah. We'd be full in like 4 days.
Yeah. It'd just be like totally different approaches, but getting the job done regardless. It's like the outcome is the same, which is part of what I love about your options, right? And like really you doing marketing that plays to your strengths. That's the opportunity for therapists right now, is that there's a lot of ways to market a practice,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you for saying that. I think that sometimes therapists feel like they have to fit this specific or perfect like strategy and do everything. And I tell them that all the time. I say, what are your natural talents? Get rid of the rest, outsource that, hire someone else. You don't need to do everything. And that's just so important. And it's exhausting when we're trying to do everything. But we would love to know a little bit about like what you're saying, Allison, is your guys' personal experiences in regards to moving and relocating and opening a practice.
Yeah. Well, my tack has always been really heavy on networking. I want to throw my computer against the wall at least once a week, just in general. And so I felt really outmatched with the idea of understanding the internet and technology. I just felt like, okay, I know how to connect with people, so I'm going to use that strength, and hopefully that will work. And so when I moved to Seattle, which is when I really needed to start learning how to market, I met 90 people in 90 days, which is not something I recommend for people to do, but I was in a new city and I was really lonely and I'm super extroverted. So I was going to shrivel up and die if I didn't do it. So
that's aggressive.
Yeah. And it worked. Like it took a little while to start getting those referrals, but those seeds that I planted really sprouted. And I had a website that had great copy, but you would never have found it unless somebody gave you my card. Cause I didn't even know what SEO stood for, much less have the first clue how to do it. So I basically, employed that, plus a little bit of SEO when I, moved to North Carolina, just networked my tail off and, got involved with some organizations that are aligned with my ideal client population. So that was what worked best for me.
Awesome. What about you, John?
Well, I think one part that I would add, I think some folks don't think about is start doing your market research as soon as you can. Like as soon as I knew that we were moving to Charlotte, I created a list of therapists that I would call, really just not necessarily for the sake of marketing, because that hasn't shown up yet. No one's going to know who the heck I am. But I was asking therapists generally three things. What's working for your practice right now? In other words, how are clients finding you? That's one of my favorite questions to ask any therapist, right? Because what's working in San Francisco wasn't necessarily going to work in Charlotte. So what's working for you? How do clients find you? And then determining how much can I charge, right? And at the time moving to Charlotte, I was told unanimously that you cannot start a private pay practice here. So that's the culture I was coming into in private practice was you need to be on insurance, and oh, by the way, all the good panels are full. So everyone's painting this really dark picture.
You're doomed.
Yeah, you're really doomed. And then starting to think about where should my office be? What's the location that might make sense for me? But you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So again, asking therapists to let you in a little bit on what's working and what the climate is like for private practice in your new city.
And I'm going to assume, like, as you're reaching out to them, you're starting to build relationships. So just kind of like Allison was building relationships, you were kind of building relationships in this way.
That's the weird thing about me is that I have scaled this group. My group practice has been open for now less than 2 years since I moved here, maybe a year and 9 months. And I've got 4 full-time clinicians, and I've only networked with one person in 2 years. So that's a bizarre kind of caveat. So absolutely everything that I've done has been digital up until this point. So certainly making some connections. I made a friend that way. But in terms of like hoping that these new connections would become referral sources for me was not necessarily my approach right off the bat.
Gotcha. That's interesting you say that, because I've built the majority of my own practice digitally as well. Didn't do a lot of, I did networking, but I was doing it in a way that was exhausting me. And I wasn't looking for who held my ideal client, because I didn't know. I just was giving it all to everybody. Yeah. And then I was like, I'm not doing this networking stuff. I'll just stick to online stuff. And that's
and I think we have to define networking too, because I think a lot of therapists just go out there and go, oh, someone on a Facebook group said I should be networking, so I'm going to do that. So, right. And this is where I would go back to Allison and say, okay, so if you are going to network, like, have a goal, have a reason why you're doing it, know why you're doing it, and network with the right people.
Yeah. I think efficiency is so important in networking, like making sure it's effective and it's efficient instead of just like, I mean, you may as well just put cards on everybody's mailbox if you're going to just blah. So I think
drive-by marketing.
Yeah. Instead, like forming relationships with the people that your ideal clients are going to go to before they find you. And that's what I've usually done. And that's going to differ based on your ideal client and your niche and all of that. So,
and we actually have a podcast that we just did with Joe Muirhead focused on networking. So we'll put the links for that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm curious, John, about your online digital strategies. How early on before you actually relocate do you start working on the preparation digitally, like in the online aspect?
That's a good question. Yeah, I took a couple of notes and broke this up into basically 2 timelines. So the first kind of phase, I would say, is in that 3 to 6 month phase, when you're about 3 to 6 months out. That is when you should start your website and launch your website and have it go live, even if you don't have an office yet. You probably don't have an office yet, but that shouldn't stop you from getting a head start, because if you know anything about SEO, you know that it takes time. You know that, and we have to tell all the folks we work with, all the therapists that we do SEO for, that it's going to take a number of months. And in fact, that 3 to 6 month window is really kind of an industry standard for actually seeing SEO results after the work's been done. At the time, I named my business with a region-specific keyword. At the time, that was the general theory was that is best practice. It's not so much that way now. So I would say for folks getting ready to name a practice, don't feel pigeonholed into making it, chicagocounseling.net. .io or whatever. Try to squeeze in these keywords for like what could be kind of an ugly name that you don't like. So the general consensus with SEO is that certainly having a name like mine, which is Charlotte Counseling and Wellness, can help and did give me a head start in terms of leveraging keywords, but you really don't have to. And if I could go back, I probably would just name it something a little more creative. Just for what it's worth. So, but in that 3 to 6 months, I would go ahead and set up your website, set up your services pages, which are going to be really important for both SEO and Google AdWords. Optimize your search engine related phrases at minimum. Optimize those phrases to include your region specific keywords. And again, I didn't know that I was going to be in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte, but I knew I was going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina, working with adults with anxiety and depression or whatever. So I could go ahead and plug those keywords in. And then another important step was to index those pages with Google. So if you are going to do some of your SEO, and I know we could talk about this for 6 hours, but those are 2 things you could do, and make sure you're indexing them with Google. So Google actually knows that you're kind of on the map somewhere now, and you can start getting that traction. So I would set those things up, set your pages up, set the keywords up, and then I would start your content strategy basically, and I would stick with it for that many months out.
And I'm not sure all of our listeners know what it means to index with Google. So can you talk about just what that means? Yeah,
it's kind of like Google, and rather than like teaching like specific tactics for SEO, I like to try to help people understand how Google thinks. And so Google doesn't know that you exist yet. And so indexing your pages, and if you just go to Google and type in how to index pages with Google or using the Google crawl feature, it's kind of like raising your hand and saying, hey, Google, I've got some new pages over here and I want you to come take a look at them. It's a way to speed up the process in getting recognized by Google versus just existing out there on page 72 of Google, and then slowly getting some traction kind of by happenstance. Nice. So it's a way to kind of accelerate that process and tell Google that your site is important and it has some regional keywords that you want Google to notice.
Hey Google,
so what you're saying is it's important to raise our hand.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, listening to this podcast, like as you move from state to state, like what about incorporation? And you're talking also about your name. Do you keep your name? Do you let go of your name? Do you close that incorporation? Can you guys talk on that?
Yeah. So I had to close mine in Seattle and then reincorporate or start a new corporation. I'm not sure exactly. I had somebody else do it. But here in North Carolina, which I'm sure John encountered too, is like when it's your practice, you can't become a corporation without going through your licensing board. And so there's all this weird like paperwork back and forth between the state and the licensing board that you have to manage. So which I did not have in Seattle and I got really confused about initially. Yeah, I had to close up shop there and open up here.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because we don't have that in Florida. We don't have to go through our licensing board for incorporation.
Yeah, I think that it's basically like, because to be a PLLC as a therapist here, in order to be the professional, and I don't think they'd let you do it otherwise. It's really just pieces of paper where the state says, yeah, we're cool with this. And then the licensing board says, yeah, we're okay with this too. And then they get married. I don't know, but something happens and somehow we're legitimate.
So I would assume that you have, in addition to that, you obviously have to update your address to the new location. And then do you guys have city and county business tax licenses there in North Carolina? Because then we have to set that up in Florida.
Yeah, we don't have a city business license here in Asheville, but apparently there is this like tax for helpers that I didn't realize about the first year I was here. That's like $200 a year or something. Florida has a similar thing, I know. Or no, Tennessee has a similar thing, I know. But just like a rando thing you're supposed to magically know that you need.
I'd love to meet the person that came up with that tax. They're like, what else do we need? Other barriers do we need to put in front of therapists to help people? How about the helper's tax? Let's call it $250, you know.
Yeah.
I know, like, are we doing enough?
$275.
Right.
I thought we're doing enough to save the world and make a difference. And it's like, boom, slam on a tax.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
I think going back to the business name thing, certainly if you have a region-specific business name, then you're going to want to leave that or potentially sell it, or at least sell your URL or the assets of the business. In my case, I had grown my practice in San Francisco under my personal name, which meant that I after all those years of work and ranking on page 1 of SEO, I could do absolutely nothing with it. So that's something to think about in general. And that's a reason why I don't endorse, naming your business johnclarktherapy.com. If you think you might ever potentially move, no one's going to buy that business. Or if you grow it into a group practice, you're going to run into issues. So, but we are working with one therapist who's moving actually from the Bay Area to Asheville. And so her site is under her personal name, and we're going to have, we're basically just going to redo the SEO work and help her bring that business to Asheville and reuse that website, optimize it for the new locale. And then she will need to file for, her PLC in North Carolina and also make sure that her business name isn't taken. So that would be another thing. If you have a name like Thrive something counseling, .com, and you bring it to, let's say, Charlotte, you would need to make sure that at least that name's not being used, and you want to get it registered with your county or city and just follow all those steps.
So, John, you talked about website and SEO and starting to work on that 3 to 6 months before you actually relocate. And what are some of the other online strategies that you've used that you found really helpful in building your practice?
So I would, once you've taken care of those things, and let's say you've done all those and you've maintained some consistent content strategy for those months leading up to your arrival, and then you finally arrived. So you're going to be looking for an office space pretty quickly. I think I said this on Allison on your show that I always recommend not growing faster than your business itself. So when you move to a new place, renting a whole office, or in a lot of people's cases, like an office suite, is not a good idea. So you land to a new place, you don't know anyone, and you put a giant overhead, against yourself. So I think starting small, subleasing, but then in terms of the digital stuff, once you have an office, which is going to be important, obviously plugging that address into your website, your Psychology Today profile, and setting up your Google My Business listing is one of those things that you can't do until you have a physical address, because they have to send you a postcard in the mail. So if you could do it earlier, I would definitely recommend it, because there's a ranking system to that in itself. But the second you have an office, get your Google My Business listing set up. There's a couple kind of rules of thumb for that as well. Make sure you have all the sections filled out in their entirety. Make sure you have high quality, professionally taken photos in every category. So everything from like pictures of the interior of your office, the exterior, your logo. Google wants to see that you have basically a complete profile and that you've covered all your bases. That's going to help you in the actual ranking on the map and on that map view that you see at the top of a lot of search results. And then the last thing I'll say is Google My Business just released a new feature where you can actually publish a post, kind of like you would do on Facebook, to promote your Google My Business listing. So I don't know precisely how that factors in, but obviously if Google's making this an option, they want to see us using it. So for my practice, we're posting every single week a new blog post or whatever it is to the actual Google My Business listing.
Cool. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I'm also curious, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening as well that are wondering, like, what if I take insurance? Like, what do they need to be prepared for? What's the process? What do they need to know? Switching states.
Well, it depends on if the insurance will cover like online counseling or not, which I would also recommend. Like, that's one thing that made the transition a lot easier for me from Seattle to Asheville is I had a lot of clients who I did private pay online sessions with. So that actually covered more than my rent. Oh shoot, the Roomba's about to go off. Hold on.
That's a great point though. I can pick up on that, and that helped me a lot in the transition as well financially, is seeing a handful of clients from California while I was making that transition. And that did help a good bit until I had an office and could get my own clients. But yeah, having something like that can be a cushion and a transition is a great idea, Allison.
Yeah, and one thing I'm thinking is I know in Florida it's really hard there's like no reciprocity license wise, and so you have to jump through some hoops. And so probably in that like 3 to 6 months, I would recommend 6 months at least, especially if you're moving to Florida, New York, or California, is contact the licensing board there to see what's required to transition your license. Because I love that idea is if you're already licensed in X state and then you transition to Y state, you can do, and continue to do technology assisted counseling. So that's awesome while you're growing your practice. It's a great little ninja tip. So Allison, you were saying?
Yeah, I was just saying, like my online clients brought me a cushion with me, and I was able to keep doing the good work, and I was pretty selective about who I invited to that option because I wanted to make sure that they were stable and appropriate for online counseling. Yeah, so that was something I was really grateful for.
So part of that is just knowing, the laws and rules in your state around technology assisted counseling. Right. Like say, for example, you hadn't done that yet, but you're like, oh, here's a great way to buffer is know them in the state that you're licensed so you can ensure you're practicing legally and ethically to do that. But great. I love that idea.
Yeah. I think too, with people who are like people who are coming from states that are a pain in the neck to get licensed, like it's not just the state you're moving to that can make it really hard to get licensed, it's also the state that you're in. So the second you're moving, go ahead and get that process going.
Yeah, we're in one of those states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, North Carolina is a tough state because they have a lot of really weird rules about which classes you had to have taken in grad school. And so I've had people that I've helped build who had to go, like they've been licensed 10 years in another state and they have to take a class online before they can get licensed here.
We hear that often.
Yeah. Same here in Florida.
So what else?
That part can really make or break your transition. I really, again, and I didn't start by mentioning that part, but certainly the second you're moving, start that process. It took me the better part of a year, which seems ridiculous to get something transferred, but you just never know. And you don't want that to be the thing that inhibits you from starting a practice when you arrive. The last thing I would say about just kind of making it work strategically or even financially is I don't think there's anything wrong with targeting or picking up like some part-time clinical work or agency work or shifts at the hospital or whatever it may be to kind of help with that transition and to get connected with people. We know that private practice can be isolating. It can be just you in your office seeing clients and then going home, And so I think, getting plugged into something can help both just kind of socially and with your transition and also give you that cushion financially. Because the last thing that I want to see is therapists who are working from a deficit and are working out of desperation to fill their empty slots. And so I think the transition poses that risk for a lot of therapists is that they might start from that point of being desperate. And I think that changes the dynamic of your business, of your interaction with clients, of how you do initial consults with clients and in the end, your marketing. So I definitely don't want therapists to be operating from that deficit.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said that because not only is it in transition, I know I have a similar story when I went into private practice full time right during the holidays. I couldn't breathe for 6 weeks because I was so paranoid. And I actually did I went back to part-time work. I was a part-time clinical director for 6 months and that's okay. And it's all part of many of our journeys and don't take that as, you missed it, you didn't do it right or whatever. It's just part of your journey. It's a little hiccup or the transition. And so really just giving you guys permission that however you do your private practice journey, it's cool. It's great. It's okay. So appreciate that.
I think another important thing to consider too is how do you typically do with transitions personally?
Yeah.
And making sure that you're leaving space and time to actually feel those feelings. Do the things you need to do to build your personal community, not just your business community, and still connecting to the people from your old community in order to keep you buoyed. So
that's a really good point. I'm not moving cities, but I'll be moving private practice locations very close to where I'm located now. I've been here almost 8 years in this location, and the building was purchased by new owners, and we've got some issues with parking and stuff like that now. So I'm not renewing my lease, and I'm excited about the change and the growth. We're going to be expanding a little bit, but along with that comes anxiety and there's a lot of other balls in the air. So it's that anticipatory, not knowing what to expect. And I've been looking for a new office space now for about a month and a half. We've looked at about 12 spaces. I'll be going again tomorrow for a hopefully final round of picking the right space. But yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up about the transition and the change. And I can imagine if I was moving both my house, my whole personal life, my son's school, and there's so many parts to that, being able to give yourself space to deal with the emotions that come up around that. That's a really good point.
I was thinking about having a trusted friend or partner that you can have your temper tantrums with.
Yep.
Somebody on call.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that maybe you guys didn't anticipate, and then that kind of showed up as you transitioned?
Good question.
That is a good question.
I could do the Jeopardy song. No, I'm just kidding.
I think going into private practice is the nature of it is knowing that things aren't always going to go the way you think they are. And so much of it has to do with persistence. Success in private practice has a lot to do with persistence and our ability to be okay with the unknown and recover from setbacks.
Nice.
Sometimes I really think that just has a lot to do with whether people make it, whatever that means for you in private practice, or where they go, this isn't for me. And I like to give a lot of people permission that this isn't for everyone, and it's okay. And it's a big thing to take on, to grow a new business in a new city on top of everything else you're going through, on top of that transition. But I guess I would just know that there is going to be a slightly different kind of private practice culture wherever you go, and people are going to have different reactions to therapy. Or for instance, the work I did in San Francisco with clients who are stereotypically very therapy savvy, and very looking for very, very specific kinds of therapy was a little bit different in coming to Charlotte, right? And also in San Francisco, they were ready to pay out of pocket. That was very, very normal. And then coming here, it was we had to do more of a sell to help people understand why we're working in this private pay model. So just be ready for those things and go into it knowing that you're in a different market. And so you're going to have to, adapt as you go.
Great.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think for me, like John alluded to this earlier, of like the second time around, you've learned so much that like it's easier with quotation marks, because it's not easy, but you've learned enough in the first go round that you can usually apply, even if there are some individual differences between cities, because who you are and how you market is translatable across, cities or countries probably. So, and I think for me, like when I filled up here, like I felt sad that I wasn't going to get to do that again, which is why I went to practice building. And now I'm a stage mom living vicariously through everybody else's practice building. But it's, I think the fact that I realized how much I had learned when I moved here. Even though there were some things kind of stacked to make it a bit harder, like I had a toddler this time and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. And what about...
the last thing.
No, go ahead.
Some people want to grow really fast when they move to a new city. Some people are okay with growing really slow. And this is something else, and I think we talked about on your show, which is that people want to know, okay, what are all the steps, or how much money is it going to take? And it's really like, it just depends. When I moved here, I wanted to be pretty aggressive. I also had the ability to do my own SEO work, which not everyone has, and I certainly don't always recommend. But then getting here, I had already told myself, okay, I'm going to set aside this amount of money per month and have kind of a monthly budget as to what I'm going to put into this business to get clients right away. And I would do myself a disservice if I didn't mention Google AdWords in this episode, but AdWords gave me the control in starting this business to go, this month I'm putting $500. I'm going to be a little more aggressive with my AdWords. And then next month I'm going to bump it down to 200 or whatever it may be. And also I want to target a really specific client in a really specific part of Charlotte. That helped me a lot as well. So, getting Google's attention with SEO, but also having kind of my finger on the trigger with AdWords as well helped me feel like I can kind of open and close that faucet as I need to as I build until I have just as I'm establishing other ways of clients finding me.
Well, and that makes me think too, John, about how like when you were in San Francisco, like there's more kind of like SEO competition, so to speak.
Big time.
Yeah.
Huge.
Versus, I mean, like I did like the tiniest, most amateurish SEO things to my therapy website, and it soared to the top of Google in my niche in my city. So like there are some cities where like if you move to a smaller city like both of us did, it was like the trumpets start blaring like welcome to town. So I think that's another thing to consider about this city where you're moving is some of the marketing might be a lot more impactful than where
Definitely.
you came from, and vice versa.
Definitely.
Awesome. And what would you guys say your final takeaway is from your message today, or your messages collectively? What do you want people most to know?
I think that it's doable. Like it's a lot. Like it's a lot to pack up your life and move to a different place and then unpack your life and start a business. I mean, it's a lot and it's doable. So like do the things that work to get you clients before. It'll probably work here too.
Awesome. What about you, John?
I've talked a lot about getting web traffic to your new website today, and I would say that the big caveat for all of that, in any digital marketing for that matter, is clarifying your message, getting really clear on the words that you're going to use to describe what you do. The more therapist websites that are out there, the more noise there is, the more confusion there is, the more you have clients sitting there with 10 tabs open of different therapist websites. So you have between 6 and 9 seconds statistically to convince someone to keep reading on your website or they leave. And so I would say focus on getting the words right, focus on really clarifying your message before and or during this process of getting more traffic to your site. So always kind of keep that in mind. And as things get more dense online, keep in mind the importance of finding the right words to describe what you do.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. I know sometimes it's like takes an act of God to get like the four of us together. And we just so appreciate you guys as people, as practice builders, and helping therapists grow and build their dream practices. And of course, John really weighs heavily, as he was talking about, on really the media aspect, the digital. Allison's also networking, just the whole abundance mindset. And so again, if you haven't checked them out as of yet, make sure you do so, and all that stuff will be on the show notes page. And next week, we are going to have Dr. Lisa Herman, who is going to talk about building an online group practice. So this is not a brick and mortar group practice. This is an online group practice. So you'll definitely want to listen to that. It's a really cool niche. And if you do know a colleague of yours that's moving, or maybe you're moving yourself, make sure you share this podcast with them to really help them set them up for success and think about these things that they may have not thought about. So Startup Nation, thanks again for hanging out with us. We had a great time. Feel free to subscribe, rate, and review on this podcast. We'd love to know your thoughts, your ideas, how this stuff is inspiring you and working magic in your practice building life. And so until next time, thank you for allowing us to inspire you from startup to mastery. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.